Okay, today we're talking to Aaron from Wilt, Australia's online platform for end-of-life planning. So, hello, Aaron.
Oh, Andy, great to be here.
Great, thanks for joining us. So, maybe we can kick off with the basics, and if you can let us know, what do you need to get started if you don't already have a will? What should you do as just the absolute basics?
Sure. So you really have to establish these things. Firstly, who you want to leave what to. They're called your beneficiaries.
Yep.
You're going to need to know who they are, and you'll have to decide, is it a percentage or is it actual gifts themselves? But you've got to leave something to someone.
Yep.
And the other key thing is really who takes responsibility for making it all happen after you've passed. That's called the executor. They're the ones who are legally entrusted and empowered to do that after a person's passed away. You have to work those things out before you can really get it done.
Do anything. Okay. With the executor, is it better to have someone that you know that's really, really close to you, or someone a little bit at arm's length? There's quite often a lot of debate in regards to the executor of your will.
Sure. So I'll talk personally.
Yep.
My wife is the executor on my will. She's sort of the first person, but there's going to be a range of backups that people will put in play, because the person that you choose may not be able to do it at the time. They may not be alive, or you may choose, you might change your mind. So it can be someone that you trust. It is quite a responsibility, and that's why many people will choose to appoint a professional executor, because it's often very difficult for people. There's a lot of work potentially, and some people just do want arm's length. I mean, let's face it, some people just don't trust anyone, and they certainly don't want kids or family members to have big arguments, so they just don't want them to have the hassle, in which case they'll choose either someone at arm's length or professional.
Yeah, and I've never really thought of, with you saying a professional executor, is that like usually having a lawyer or something like that?
Yes, it's often lawyers will be in that position to do it. There are trustee companies that will do it. For example, here in Victoria, there's state trustees. They do a lot of these sorts of executorships. Yep. And there are also professional executor companies that are out there, like Australian Unity or Perpetual or EQT, for example, and that's their business, is to handle these things for the relevant sort of fees.
Perfect. Now, it sounds like a basic question, but I think sometimes people don't think through the implications. So what is the importance of having a will?
Firstly, it's really just to express what you want with your worldly possessions, but even just things that you want to happen after you've died. Who do you want to be the person carrying out your funeral wishes, and what are the funeral wishes? These are really important things that you just have in your heart. Even if you don't have a lot of assets, you will necessarily want someone to do it your way. You may not have a lot of assets, but you might have sentimental gifts, for example. So if you don't actually specify who gets what, it's creating an opportunity for big fights and confusion. And it could even be as simple as you have a pet and you want your pet to be in the care of the right person with the right sort of provisions. And if you don't do that, it just becomes a big problem for people. So yeah, that's all relevant reasons to get it done.
Absolutely. And speaking about problems, what happens if you don't have a will?
Sure. So if you don't have a will when you pass away, or one can't be found also, then you're said to have died intestate. And each state and territory has its own specific rules as to what happens to any assets that you leave behind. It can be really quite complicated, very costly, and often the wrong people will get the assets sorry, let me say that again. It may be the wrong people in the wrong proportions. It may not even be people that you wish to leave anything to.
Yeah.
And in some rare cases, if you really just don't have any family members that can be found, then the state can take assets, which obviously is not desirable to anyone unless you just love paying tax and you want to give it, charitable donation to the state. But that's that is a concern. But just putting it really simply, the state has a formula. Each state will have a formula, and it may be, for example, a certain amount goes to your spouse, the rest go to your kids, but that may not be exactly what you want in any event.
No, that makes sense. You mentioned if one can't be found. So where should you store your will then?
Good question. A lot of people firstly believe that there's some sort of national register that you just call up and, that's where you find the will. And that doesn't exist, at least not in this country, as a central repository. We recommend that people firstly store it in a safe place and let the important people know where it is. So that can be in their bedside table drawer, but importantly, letting the people who will have to find that will at the time know.
Oh, yeah.
You could also leave the will, or at least a certified copy of the will, with one of your executors. I mean, ideally, you've told them you're going to be handling things when I die, right? And so you can leave your original will with them, and then they have to store it. Some people will use like a safety deposit box, for example, and there's lots of places you can store it. Traditionally, also, people would go to a solicitor and have them hold the will, which often solicitors are happy to do because they hope to get the work of probate, which you can explain down the track. So isn't that great? They're in pole position if they hold the will, but holding it doesn't give anyone rights themselves to do anything.
Sure. Is it important who witnesses the will? For example, if you are going to benefit from the will, you shouldn't be a witness. Is there anything sort of those sort of nuances in regards to witnesses?
So, as a simple rule, it should be someone who's over 18, an adult, who doesn't have an interest in the will. In other words, they're not a beneficiary of the will.
Okay. Simple, right?
Steering clear, steering clear of that makes all the difference. Generally speaking, we'd encourage people as well to have a separate person to the executor witness the will. It doesn't make it invalid, but it's best practice not to have the executor as the witness as well.
Good advice. Okay, so in terms of then other things people should avoid, what would you say is the number one thing that people should avoid where wills are concerned?
I do think procrastination should be avoided. And that can be writing your first will. Don't get superstitious and think, well, if I write a will, I'm going to die. It doesn't really work that way. And also not being complacent that I did it years ago and of course it's the same. Even if people's assets haven't changed, for example, the people that they've named in their will, even if their beneficiaries haven't changed, but the people handling things, the executor may well not be suitable anymore. They might have had a falling out with them. They may be too old or now live somewhere in an unsuitable place. So, look, it sounds, everyone says you've got to review things, you've got to maintain things, but it's true. You actually need to at least know what's in it and know that it does suit your needs. So that's the biggest issue, is that people they just stick to not doing anything.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of, you mentioned, keeping it updated, is it like a normal document where if you strike something through, there needs to be the witness signing there as well at the changes? Or what are
updating wills is complicated. It can be done in what's called a codicil. So it is possible to make edits to a will and to document that all correctly. That is something that would definitely be done with legal advice as to how to do that accurately, because it's so prone to error. In the case of our organisation, wills, people can actually update their will and just write a fresh will. So explain, for example, if they've put in all the details about who their executor and beneficiary is, if they make any changes, it would produce a new will. And every will that's written through our platform always makes the previous one, it replaces any previous will. So that's what we recommend, rather than editing will, because it's prone to error. And then what happens is, when it comes time to validate the will through the courts, which is called probate, if there are errors or things that be picked apart, it leaves it open to disputes and problems even getting probate. That's the real issue.
Okay, perfect advice. That's great. Now, you mentioned there when we were saying what's the number one people that people should thing that people should avoid, and you said just procrastination and getting the first will written. So, if I was writing a will for the very first time, what would be the main piece of advice that you would give me as a first-time will writer? I guess
it does come back to what I said before. Just work out who gets what and who you'd want to handle things. They're the key things. If you've got children under the age of 18, the third thing will be who you would want to be the guardian. If it wasn't, say, the other parent of the child being the guardian, or if both parents weren't alive anymore, who would you want to be the guardian? But just working out those three things, that's the key. You don't have to list every asset. You don't even have to deal with any you don't have to specify any assets for a will to be valid, but you still need to say, for example, that all your assets go to these people in this proportion. So I think just think that through, jot it down, And obviously, if you're using Willed, you can just answer the questions.
Yeah.
But even if you're going a more traditional path and having a one-on-one consult with a lawyer, they're going to ask you to come up with those answers.
Yep.
So you do need to know that.
Know that beforehand. So you're obviously in the whole business of will. That's why you're our expert when it comes to wills. What's the biggest surprise since you sort of have been in this industry? What's the biggest surprise that you've kind of come across?
I would say it's challenged the belief that people don't want to deal with death. They don't want to handle their affairs. They would prefer just to always avoid it. There certainly are people who do avoid it, people who are superstitious about it. But over a certain age, and particularly with your audience that starts at 60, I think people do embrace it generally. They feel very happy about getting these things done or updated or in place. You don't want to leave issues for their loved ones. And who does? Sure. Some people say, oh, I don't care. I'll be dead anyway. You get that occasionally. But the people who take the steps to get these things in place kind of embrace it much more than we had thought when we founded the company a few years ago.
Okay, no, that's amazing. It's actually good to hear, isn't it? Maybe to finish up, maybe we can do a bit of myth busting at the end. Obviously, Willed is an online platform for getting your will done. I have heard, and our audience is very digitally savvy. They're all online. Probably more than me. So our audience is very much comfortable in the online environment. But there has been a little bit of, I've noticed, conversation around wills in particular, that wills that are done online are not legally binding or won't hold up in court. So can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, the whether or not that's true or not, I guess.
Oh, sure. So firstly, let's just talk about an online will. And in our case, we provide an online will, but that's not the end of the story, because you might enter in your details as to who you want to be, your beneficiaries and executors and all the details. You put that online. But importantly, we're producing an actual document that's printed and signed, and there's all detailed instructions. And once it's signed, it is a legally valid will. That's really crucial. So it's not a purely online will that just exists in cyberspace. If someone did write such a will, that could still count as an informal will in the courts, but that's not what we're producing at Willed. We're actually producing traditional wills through an online service, if that makes sense.
Right. So the signature is the really, really important piece of the puzzle for all wills.
That's right. That's right. And as I've said, you have to have the right ingredients in every will. You always need to specify the executor and the beneficiaries, and it needs to print out correctly and have all the pages and needs to be signed in every place and witnessed, as we've said. But once that's followed, you are producing a legally binding will. And verification of that is seen in the fact that we've had so many wills that have all gone through to achieve probate without a single issue. We've not ever had a single issue with getting the courts to validate the will after a person's died. So this is now something that is becoming the norm. Certainly when we started, it was, is that real? Is that legit? Is this, what is this? That's not the case. We don't even get those questions nearly or almost ever these days.
Awesome. That's great. All right, Aaron, thank you for your time today.
My pleasure. Great to be here.